Welcome. My name is Menno, and I'm going to talk about biourbanism and design, physiology, and psychology. I started a PhD in 2011 in neuroscience and design, and as a part of the International Society for Biourbanism, I'm interested in how humans interact with the built environment around them, and especially from a neuroscientific point of view, how our brain responds to stimuli, and how neuroscientists can advise architects, urban designers, or designers in general on what to design and how this will influence the user. First of all, I would like to show you an example. In this example, I would like you to focus on the slides that you will see and think about the building that you see and how the building is changing. So here you see the Hult International Business School. And now some expansion works are going to happen. So this is a really easy example of how a building can change. In this case, I would also like to ask to look at the tree, the motorcycle, or the cyclist, how their role in the street changes in the two pictures, and how the building feels different. Feeling is not a very scientific term, but the actual building has a linear increase in height. However, the perceived building height, or even the meaning that the building carries, for example, the perceived building grandiosity, is not necessarily a linear increase. Buildings like this, they have a role within society, role within an area, and we as humans attribute meaning to them. Now, this meaning is where neuroscientists can come into play, because we can not necessarily trick the brain, but we can show the brain particular things that it needs to see. When I started my PhD, this was one of the first papers that I read, which is about ceiling height. Now, from a biourbanism global perspective, ceiling height is a rather large gap. What I just want to illustrate with this is that it suggests that the way how our brain functions is influenced by the environment that the brain is in. So, to mention one small thing out of this paper is that participants, they were asked to group words that weren't necessarily related in self-organized groups. So they needed to come up with a group name and then classify the words within those groups. What they found was that the room with a higher ceiling had more creative and more complex group names, which suggested to them not necessarily that the increase in ceiling height made people creative, but that the reduced perception of confinement allowed for higher cognitive effort. So it is a bit difficult because people who I tell this to, they always say, so if you want to be really creative, you need to have a warehouse, or you need to be even outside, and then there's no ceiling height, so you're limitlessly creative, which is not true. But we can see that in this particular environment where every stimulus is the same, apart from the ceiling height, it does have an influence on how the brain functions. If we look at physiology, this is an example in the States where they build a church that is supposed to enhance any emotional experience which is happening in or around the building. Now, if this happens because it is within nature, or it is made from natural materials, if it's the repetitive pattern in the beams, or if it's symmetry, I'm personally not sure. But what it does show is that you can build buildings with a purpose, and even that they can have physical results and physiological results in the amount of hormones that are released. Serotonin, for example, like how happy you are, or how sad you are, Um, so if it is a bit difficult to go in there and jab everyone and measure the amount of endorphins flowing through them, but it's at least reported increased perception. So when you ask people, which is a good start, but it should be controlled in lab with a scientific experiment that we can use on a day-to-day basis. But now the question is, how does building A and building B lead to a different response? So how does environment 1 or environment 2 change the amount of neurotransmitters released or the amount of receptors activated? How does this work? One of the ways that the brain is communicating to its environment is through the parasympathetic and sympathetic pathways. This is a way of the body to talk to the brain and the brain to talk to the body on how you feel. I can't go through all of them, but one example is, for example, sweat glands. As in, if you give a presentation, you're generally a bit sweaty in your hands because you're nervous about what the audience thinks or about giving a good presentation in general. Now, if I take the example of sweaty hands, which is generally a stress response, we can look at the study that I started, which is how the built environment can contribute to the attenuation of a stress response. So if we just really briefly look at some graphs that are from my study, you can see that we have three environments which are very similar, and we expose people to auditory stressors. So there are sounds which are stressful, so a gunshot or someone screaming, or and there are standardized sounds. So in a controlled setup, we found that the environment contributes to the actual physical stress response, which in this case was GSR measure, so galvanic skin response. So the amount of sweat which is occurring within your skin, in your hands, which is directly steered by the brain, which is perceiving the stress. So this is just one example of how we react to our environment and how we can distill specific architectural features that can contribute or diminish particular responses. Now, to sum up this presentation, which has been very short, but I hope you still enjoyed it, is that I believe that stimuli have set responses with a margin of response amplitude differentiation based on the state and trait of an individual. Furthermore, I believe that the responses to these architectural stimuli are predictable through patterns and codes. By understanding these patterns and codes, we can anticipate how humans will respond. We know this because humans are natural beings which we start to comprehend. We can design urban spaces from which we can positively influence the behavior and usage of a space to enhance personal and society well-being. Then the last thing I would like to give to you is that we can mimic natural qualities within man-made environments to ensure a sustainable response for humans, which is not detrimental to our existence. Thank you very much for listening, and it's a bit difficult for you to ask questions to me, so please feel free to send me an email. Thank you very much.